to me is this is the essence of anatta. This is its, even if you would say that it could mean a number of different things, to me this is the psychological significance of the idea or principle of anatta, that that there is no free will, that you couldn't choose and you couldn't stipulate how to feel and what to think and so on and so forth. And this is one of the things for which meditation, even beginners in the practice of meditation, learn. That meditation basically, or the initial failure in it, teaches you something about how not in control you are, even of your basic thoughts. That you couldn't stop thinking, or that if you were to try to think of something in particular, you couldn't do it also. And this is really important. Like the beginning of meditation is to try to do it and to fail. You try to focus with something and to fail, or to try to prevent the condition of wandering thought and lack of attention and collected attention, and you fail. And you know, what is this telling you about your mind and about the state of your mental existence? It tells you that you're not in control, and rather the opposite, actually. If you really think about it, it's usually these mental functions, whether they are cognitive or emotional, that are in control of you, and that it is extremely difficult to change this situation. And to me, this is the like, if you don't get this about Buddhism, then you're really going in a very different direction, like say. And however much you may agree or disagree with this interpretation, but you are intelligent enough to be able to see that if you did understand anatta in this light, if you really understood that it is a teaching about the absence of free will, then everything will change for you. Everything in life, everything in Dhamma practice will go in a different direction. Even if you disagree with this interpretation, at least you could see that if you regarded the will as something that is not free, as something that is conditioned, then your entire life will change. When you feel something, when you think about something, you'll say, that is not me, this is just something that is happening to me. And that's a huge difference. And this is, to me, an essential principle in Buddhism. You cannot miss out on something like that. And it represents, at least in the Indian historical context in which the Buddha was operating, it represents a religious revolution. And by the standards of the time, this was entirely revolutionary, that you cannot choose how to behave, as your behavior is not up to you, and good and evil doesn't count in behavioral terms, but rather in mental terms, in those terms, in the terms of those mental functions which condition behavior and condition the will. And this is the exact opposite of Brahmanic teachings about how you do good, you get good results, and you do bad things, you get bad results. This Hindu Brahmanic understanding of karma, which eventually became also something that I would say a majority of Buddhists subscribe to. To me, the Buddha, an essential aspect of his teaching was opposed to this understanding of karma. And there's evidently an alternative understanding of it, that karma as something mental, not something that you can contain in action. And this was absolutely revolutionary by the standards of the time, in the Indian environment of the time. Also in Persia it was the same. Whether before Zoroastrianism or after it, the emphasis on behavior and good and evil as opposed to each other, and as human will is something that chooses to be good or bad. This was prevalent in ancient times, but Buddhism was something else. And that's to this day something that is very unique about it. And the evidence of this Buddhist revolution can be found in what happened in the history of Hinduism itself. And I'm here referring to the Upanishads, and which basically represents an accommodation and adoption of this Buddhist view within a Hindu context. And you find it very, very clear if you read the Upanishads. You find this incessant emphasis on an idea of the absence of free will. And to me, this is the proof, basically, that that's what they got from the Buddha. And that's how important was the Buddha's religious revolution or contribution specifically to this point, to the extent that even later Brahmans had to incorporate that teaching in their own teaching and have it somehow reconciled to their ancient Vedas and so on. And this you could also find perhaps around the same time in China a similar development with Taoism. Of course, we cannot know whether this was through some sort of Buddhist influence or if it just happened independently, but a very similar idea or recognition of the truth, basically, that the will is not free. Now, these teachings are not saying that we have no choice either, and that's important to understand, that all that the Buddha teaches is that, well, the will is not free, and it is conditioned by deeper mental functions such as cognition and emotion, and a lot of the Buddha's teaching is directed towards explicating how these things work and how they condition behavior. But it so happens that these mental functions can be modified. And so we couldn't choose how to behave. We couldn't choose how to feel, how to think. It's not a matter of choice. But those mental functions, whether they are cognitive or conceptual or emotional, or unconscious, by the way, that they can be modified in the course of time through awareness. And this is a prominent idea in the Upanishads. It's a prominent idea in Taoism. In Upanishads, you find it in the simile of the chariot. The chariot, in which is like basically like karma, and there is someone who's driving it, but that's not really who you are. And the self, or what they call the Atman in the Upanishad, which is very different from the Atman of the Brahmins, of the Brahmanic era before that. The Atman is someone that has absolutely no will at all and is doing nothing at all. And all that it does is sit in the chariot and watch everything. It is a reference to Jnana. It's a reference to Panya. The Atman basically becomes transformed into something that is not self, to something that is a process of awareness, a process of recognition. And this is precisely how in the course of time, through this process of recognition and memory, emotional functions and cognitive functions begin to change accordingly. And out of that, behavior finally changes. You see, behavior is only the final aspect, or the will is the final the final manifestation of something mental, something psychic. And this is what the Buddha was concerned with. And a lot of the teachings of the Buddha is about explaining how emotion and cognition condition behavior, and how the practice of Dhamma in turn change emotion and cognition. It's the cause and effect that is so characteristic of the Buddha's teaching, because we couldn't reconcile these two positions, that there is a free will, or you can choose your behavior, or you can do good and get good results and all that sort of thing, or it's not or and, it's or. You have to see behavior as something that is entirely conditioned by antecedent mental functions. Now, the trouble is that these mental functions are not apparent, and that's why meditation is important, and that's why samadhi and sati are important, because it's only through this training of the mind that you could finally begin to unravel these hidden mental functions, whether they are emotional, cognitive, or unconscious, in such a way as to finally be able to change your inward being. And this really is the point. The point is not behavior at all. The point is not to do good things to get good results. I don't see this as the point of the Buddha's teaching. I think that the point is nibbana. The point is that the conditioned mind ceases to exist. Bhava nirodha. It's nirodha of what? It's the cessation of what? It's not of evil. It's not of bad things, of bad behavior. It's a cessation of the entire conditioned mind. It's a cessation of the psyche that is still enveloped by the sensorial experience and the emotional and cognitive consequences of the natural consequences of the sensorial experience. And this is what the Paticca is about. And so this is a very it's not even a new interpretation or something that was not mentioned before, or a new idea. This is a known interpretation, but what we want to begin to think about is how conflictual it is with the other understanding of karma, which is, by the way, a Hindu understanding, or not even, we couldn't even say Hindu. We would say it corresponds to the era of the Brahmins, which seem to have historically corresponded to the same time when the Buddha was living, and to which the teachings of which the Buddha was responding. He was responding to that understanding of karma, which is, by the way, also, I mean, it came to the Vedas and to the Brahmins from Persia, from ancient Persia. And this is a civilization and the religious culture known for the dichotomy between good and evil, and how it's good that wins and evil that should be defeated, and how this leads to or constitutes the deliverance of human. And this idea is very prominent in Persian, has always been in ancient times, and we know that the Vedas and the fundamental foundation of Vedic literature and doctrine, what comes from Persia. And so, to me, there is even this historical dimension. It reflects something about doctrine and about how the Buddha and other samanas, and was a different kind of culture, and it's likely to have been Indian in a indigenous sense, that it was indigenous to India. It is not coming from Persia, and influenced by the practice of meditation, because this meditation shows you, as I mentioned at the beginning, meditation shows you something about the unfreeness of the mind, and how difficult to wield and control and manipulate. And the samana were skilled in meditation, unlike the Brahmins. And this also, this historical dimension can show us a lot about how and why the doctrine is different, particularly in that point of the understanding of karma. And so, really, it's up to you. I mean, whatever understanding you have of it. But it's important to know that there are two interpretations here, or two different ways of understanding karma and the will. And then you see that they are not reconcilable. You have to pick a street here. You can't go both ways. And then it's up to you. But it is a matter of if you really see Buddhism as a teaching of do good and don't do bad, and that's all there is to it, and that is how karma works, then from my perspective, you have missed something very essential, very important about Buddhism, and without which your practice and your entire life, everyday life, normal life, how you see yourself and how you see the future, is going to be fundamentally different. Because you basically live the rest of your life feeling that you're responsible for your, not just your actions, your thoughts and your feelings, and not understanding that these are things which you've inherited and which are in control of you, and that the manner by which you become free from them is to understand that they are anatta, to understand that this is not really who you are, and that these things are as if they are external, that they've imposed upon you. Sankari paratu passa. And so this will change your entire attitude and way of practice in relation to this. That's all that I seek to accomplish here, is to get people to understand the difference between these two interpretations and the ramifications of each interpretation. Because doing good deeds, in my view, is not going to lead to deliverance in a Buddhist sense, at least in the early Buddhist sense. If you do good things and you do charity and help others, and even if you do that in every moment of your life, it's actually very likely that you will have created the conditions for rebirth and secure these conditions, and it become very difficult for you to get out of it. To me, this is not Dhamma. To me, this is something that not just deviates from it, but perhaps obstructs it. And so there is very little difference between these two things. Silapata Paramasa, as in bathing in a sacred river, and believing that by so doing you purify your soul, and you emerge from that river with your soul purified and aligned with the good destination in the afterworld. And Silapata Paramasa, as in doing charity or doing good deeds, or fighting for a noble or worthwhile cause in a mundane sense, or in a religious sense just as well. And thinking or believing that by so doing you also purify your soul, become a good human being who's deserving of a good destination in the afterlife. What's the difference? The difference is only marginal and is limited to the nature of the ritual in both cases. That's the very definition of Silapata Paramasa, is believe that by doing an action of some sort, your soul subsequently becomes purified. Or it doesn't really matter what kind of action it is. This, by the way, is the original meaning of karma, or karmin, as it used to be defined by the Brahmins. You see, it's not action in general. It's an action that is leads to purification, both in this life and the afterlife. We say a karmically significant action is an action that purifies the soul in this very life and leads to rebirth in the Deva Loka or Brahma Loka, or whatever angelic realm of the afterlife. That's a Brahmanic teaching. So it is for this reason that when I speak of do good things and don't do bad things as a non-Buddhist teaching, even though of course I understand that the Pali text is replete with references to that sort of teaching. I have no explanation of this, but all I know is that there is an alternative understanding of karma, a Buddhist definition of it, and that it is fundamentally different from this Brahmanic way. And it's for this reason that I speak of attachment to good action and to good behavior and to applying oneself in mundane terms to this or that ritual, whether it is religious or secular. In both cases, everything of that sort constitutes a silapata paramasa. It constitutes a hindrance to deliverance, a sangyujana. And that's because in as much as you apply yourself to this sort of understanding and teaching and practice and behavior, you're concomitantly moving away from the Buddhist way of practice, which is to turn your attention inwardly and to examine your own mind and to purify that through wisdom and awareness. It's not behavioral at all, it's not ritualistic at all. That's the whole point of the Buddha's teaching, and that's how it was opposed to the teachings of the Brahmins, and how it constitutes a departure from the way the Brahmins taught and practiced. Now, to me, this is a fundamental aspect of Buddhism, and if a Buddhist person or someone who calls himself a Buddhist goes about thinking that it's a good action or good karma, as the Brahmins used to call it, is going to lead to his deliverance, well, it might lead to his deliverance, but it's not going to be a Buddhist deliverance, because deliverance in Buddhism is centered around the idea of Nirodha. Nirodha is the end of the conditioned mind, of the conditioned psyche. And that's something that no ritual, no external form of behavior could ever accomplish. The only way to accomplish this emancipation in Buddhist terms is through meditation, samadhi, awareness, self-observation, knowledge about the self, knowledge about the mind, and knowledge about the ego. And it's not through any form of action, but merely and solely through that awareness and understanding that the ego evaporates in the course of time and nothing remains other than this pure awareness. And then you will find that you're no longer inclined to do anything at all, neither good nor bad actions. And this understanding itself is something that you could find in the Upanishads, and is a testimony to how the Hindu doctrine itself has transformed and adapted itself to the Buddha's teachings. If I'm not mistaken in attributing that sudden, remarkable change of Hindu doctrine to the teachings of the Buddha, right? So the difference is not subtle. It's very clear how these two directions differ from one another, and they don't intersect at any point. And it's very important to understand that this is the way of the Buddha and this is the way of the Brahmins, even if the Pali text in the course of time, for one reason or another, became really full of references to that same old Brahmin way. I mean, it's a very unfortunate thing, but, the difference between these two ways remains to be so clear, and unfortunately you couldn't find a way to reconcile them. Even the Upanishads themselves speak of the ways of the Brahmin as something that is to be abandoned. Now, they retain the wisdom of the Veda, and they retain the mythologies and the reverence and the devotion to the gods and all that, but of course they emphasize the importance of understanding all these things symbolically. And so the Upanishads of themselves found a way to adopt the Buddha's teachings in a way that will be compatible with the Veda. But even they, whomever wrote these remarkable poems and teachings, had to have the courage to break from the ritualistic way of the Brahmins, and that's the Buddhist influence. And of course, it's really problematic to see that even Buddhists today fail to see this difference and fail to understand this Buddhist contribution and revolution, actually, in the history of India and Indian religions. And it's so widespread. It's really widespread, the way this many Buddhist practitioners even have become so much inclined to charity and social engagement and let's be good, that sort of thing. Well, you could do that as a good way of spending your time, but don't substantiate it or justify it in doctrinal terms. And as I mentioned, the more you apply yourself to that way of life and to this understanding, the more you are deviating from Dhamma, not following it. Well, the reason I'm addressing this is because, of course, I understand how popular it is, the general human need for benevolence and kindness and all that. Well, I myself live depending on the kindness of others, and I should be grateful to it more than anyone else. I understand how important it is for the survival of individual and societies that there is all sorts of good things and good behaviors and good intentions and all that. But still, I mean, when Dhamma becomes basically reduced to that, then there's a problem also. Because I'm not promoting the evil. I'm not saying that evil should be responded to with neutrality. I'm not saying that evil is non-harmful. I'm not saying that doing good things is a bad thing. But the point I'm trying to make is that not only is it really not essential, it is probably not relevant to deliverance in the Buddhist sense. Especially when all you do is let me do good things. We're not doing anything as bringing you nearer to deliverance as the Buddha defined and prescribed it. So that's the problem here. The problem is that there's too much talk about metta and doing good things and that sort of thing, but very little about how this is really not the way and possibly deviates from the way. So there's a need for some sort of balance here, and believe me, in the vast majority of cases, people do good things not really on the basis of altruistic motives, even though that's how it will be rationalized by them. But most of the time, they'll do good things because it represents to them Silabbata Paramasa in a psychological sense. You feel good about yourself when you do good things. I still feel very good about myself when I do good things. The difference is that when I feel good about myself, I say, well, there is the reinforcement of the self. There is the ego. Even though it's a benevolent and kind and great ego and everyone loves it, that's another dimension, because when you do good things, people love you, isn't it? People see you nearly as a saint. And this is something that ought to be resisted. As a Buddhist practitioner, you want to resist this impulse towards goodness, right? Because if it makes you feel good, if it gives you that incredible feel-good dose of dopamine or serotonin, whatever it is that's going to really make you feel good, that's not necessarily spiritual, by the way. It's, to me, it all looks mundane, and it all looks like it's only reinforcing the ego and reinforcing the sense of self that still lingers there. It's a good self, it's a good ego, fine, but I mean, what good is it when death comes and when you become reborn because of this goodness? And reborn with ignorance, or reborn with avijja, because that's avijja still, You haven't yet discovered and understood that dimension of the ego and of selfhood. And it's grounded in goodness, but it's still a self, and it's still something to which you are bound and attached. And that's why I speak about this, because of course there's no harm in good action and good behavior, but in doctrinal terms, it's very important to understand that this reinforces the ego and the sense of self. And that's just as much dangerous to the quest of deliverance. That's as much reinforcing to avijja as doing bad things. That's why I emphasize this issue a lot, and I think it is worth talking about it more, because of course nowadays I don't know what happened at some point in the recent years. It seems like the most people are speaking about metta and about Buddhism has basically become reduced to a teaching of goodwill and benevolence. It even translated as loving kindness and things like that. And well, I want to address this issue, and I want to say that there is much more to Dhamma and to the doctrine and to practice beyond that, and that there's even some danger in reducing Dhamma to this issue. Right now, whether the audience will understand that or not is beside the point. It's just that it's important to talk about these things and to illuminate the picture for people who might understand